Hello and welcome to another bad movie review. Today I'd like to tell you about Bryan Loves You. This little gem from around 2008 was written, directed, and stars Seth Landau. That always makes me suspicious when somebody is in charge of so much of the film. It really tends to backfire. If you're not Orson Welles, chances are it's not going to work. But in this particular case, the writing seemed to be pretty decent. The plot is that a 32-year-old named Jonathan, he's a psychotherapist, um, is in a small Arizona town, supposed to be small, and everything seems to be going kind of weird, and there's a story about a guy named Bryan who was supposedly a prince, and he was killed by some guy they call the devil Tanzir or something like that. Yeah, it's kind of convoluted actually. It's supposed to be taking place in the early 1990s. And supposedly it's based on a true story. But that didn't really save the movie. Now, as far as the actors in the film, there are appearances by Todd. He does this opening narration, which sounds awesome, but it's not really the movie I watched. It's more like what the movie hoped it could be. Then there's also a guest appearance by George Wendt from Cheers. And that was really cool because I like George Wendt. I think he's a really good actor. So I was glad to see him, and he did great. I could have watched the entire movie based around his character. That would have been cool. I would have been all on board with that. Then there was Tiffany Shepis, Daniel Roebuck, and of course a cameo by Lloyd Kaufman. That guy appears in just about everything these days, I think. Everything in the last 15 years seems to have a Lloyd Kaufman guest appearances if the budget's under 50 grand. It's like he's got a requirement. If you have a high budget, he doesn't want anything to do with it. Still, it was really awesome to see him. I like Lloyd Kaufman. I think he's funny. And, of course, Scream Queen Brinke Stevens makes a guest appearance as the nurse, which is really awesome because I'm a huge Brinke Stevens fan, in case you haven't figured that out yet. All the acting was pretty... well, alright, let's be honest. Aside from the people I just named, it was fairly awful. The actors are clearly not professional actors. A lot of them seem to be theater people, and you can usually spot them. They got that William Shatner school of acting going on, where it's slightly over the top, slightly melodramatic, and that would be fine, but there were just so many of them. There were a couple of good standout actors. Seth Landau did a pretty good job, and of course the people I just listed did a pretty decent job, but it really suffered from pacing issues. Aside from the mediocre acting, the pacing really hurt the movie because it kind of drags. Like the third act of the film is kind of boring. I found myself watching the psychiatry scene at the psychiatric hospital and thinking, wow, they really need new carpet in that place. And that's not usually something that you want the audience to be thinking about. And what I really had a problem with was the premise was really cool. A cult taking over a town, and they're indoctrinating people into their wacky cult about this prince guy that, is somehow still alive, and they all love him, and he loves them, and they all wear these cool masks in honor of him, and I don't know if they're the cult of Bryan or the Bryans. There seems to be some kind of differing opinion on that online, and that seems interesting. I was intrigued by the premise, and I still am. I think the premise is really good, but the movie just suffered from really lack of a budget and lack of high quality talent. And I hate to say that because I really love bad movies, but this one was just kind of boring. Like there wasn't a whole lot of action. It wasn't scary. there was no gore, which is fine. You don't need gore every time for a horror movie, but there was nothing to kind of keep the pacing going or the movie moving along. It just kind of happened. And I've seen worse movies, don't get me wrong. Demon Under Glass was way more boring than this one. And like I said, the premise was cool, so I kept waiting for something to happen. But there's no payoff. The movie just sort of ends like a bad Law and Order episode. It's just like, oh, here he is, and this happens, and well, it's a cliffhanger ending. You're never gonna know. Ha! Screw you. Well, you know what? That's a cop out. It's lazy, a very lazy ending. Of course, it's implied that they either recapture him or kill him or whatever. But the way the movie ends is stupid. It feels like 5 minutes are missing from the very end. But the reasoning behind him doing what he does at the end of the movie makes no sense. And there's no resolution whatsoever. We don't know what happened. What happened to these other characters? This is supposed to be a found footage film, and there's no resolution, no afterthought at the end, like and we found his body 2 days later. No, there's none of that. But the entire time, the entire beginning of the movie with Tony Todd is setting up to tell you, oh, this was a big deal. This was, sort of like a Waco David Koresh kind of thing, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of confused as to, what Tony Todd said versus what happens after that. And I don't know. The found footage aspect could have used some work too. That kind of made me mad, because apparently for a group of people that don't like being filmed, there's surveillance cameras all over the place. It's like being in London. Like there had to be CCTV on every single wall. And they break the illusion of that by zooming in too much. Like there's too many close-ups of people. If they really wanted to go with the found footage aspect, they should have left it in that distant surveillance camera kind of shot and left it static like that, or have it as a pan-tilt zoom camera that would zoom in and you would see the zoom. But they transition around the room so much it kind of breaks that illusion. Otherwise that would have kind of worked for me, actually, because I don't hate the found footage films. I actually like some of them. Blair Witch Project obviously inspired this film, and rightfully so, but it just didn't really work as well as it could have here. And I think a lot of that came down to the budget. This movie probably could have been a lot better with a little bit of continuity editing, or like some oversight on what they were shooting. Like maybe have the director different than the writer and producer, or something along those lines. Using the found footage aspect is a great way to save a lot of money, and I get that. And it could have really worked here. It just didn't work this time. It didn't entirely work. Some of the scenes were really well done, but just the multitude of camera angles jumping around really hurt the film. It really pulled you out of the experience of it. And I think that's what really kind of hurt the film for me, other than the stupid ending. But that's kind of common with low budget films. And from what I was reading online, this movie had a budget of about 25 grand. So for what they had to work with, they actually had a pretty good talent pool with the guest appearances with Brinke Stevens and Lloyd Kaufman and Tony Todd and George Wendt. That's some recognizable talent there for this kind of budget. And the sets were great. Every location was really good. And it made sense. Okay, you got a cult. Yeah, they're going to meet in someone's house. Okay, I get that. That makes sense to me. But there were too many other failings. The plot, the script needed tightened up a little bit. The plot, the core idea concept was really good. It just needed tightened up a little bit. And it just felt like it needed a little more oversight to dial back the creative vision a little bit and make it a little more of a cohesive story. And they could have edited down the psychiatric hospital aspect, because that was super boring, and they could have made that into like a 10-minute sequence that would have made a little more sense. But I think they had it extended because they had access to that set. and he wanted to have a point there, but it was being dragged out too long, and somebody else being there would have really toned it back a little. Overall, it's not that good of a movie. The concept is really cool, but I have a little trouble recommending this one. This is sort of like a horror movie for boring people. Yeah, elements of it, if it was really happening to you in real life, would be scary. Being put in a mental institution or having to deal with cultists. But the rest of it, wasn't, as far as a movie goes, it wasn't scary at all. And parts of it were incredibly boring. But it was worth watching, I guess. It just wasn't something I'd recommend. Since I paid $3 for it, I kind of felt obligated to sit through the whole thing, but I found myself wanting to look at my phone, thinking about, sweeping the floor, thinking about the carpeting at that psychiatric institute, and wondering why they didn't loot the warehouse they were in near the end of the movie, stuff like that. Just random tangential thoughts that were distracting me from the immersive experience because it was just not going anywhere. Yeah, if you're a hardcore horror movie fan, this isn't going to really do anything for you. If you want to be a completionist and get all of Tony Todd's work or all of Brinke Stevens' work or all Lloyd Kaufman's appearances, yeah, it'll probably be on your shelf. Watch it once and maybe power through the whole thing. I think there's a lot of potential for the writer, director, producer, Seth Landau. I thought his core concept was good. It was just not the execution they were trying to accomplish. Parts of the scenes or parts of the movie were really good. The scene in the school where the students all put on their masks, that was cool. So there were some really good ideas here. It just was a flawed execution. But with what they had to work with, I think they tried really hard and did a pretty good job. It just, the talent pool wasn't there, the financial backing wasn't there, and they needed somebody to kind of tighten up that script a little. So overall, if you're not a completionist for one of the actors in there, or maybe you have an hour and a half of your life you never want back, maybe then I'd recommend this. Otherwise, this is probably a pan for me. I would pass on this one unless you have some super motivation. Because even from a mockery standpoint, I couldn't find anything that I could really make fun of in this one. There were no cheesy monsters. There were some really crappy special effects on the 2 or 3 mildly, I don't know how to say, the poorly executed scare moments where somebody's running fast or, you're supposed to be kind of creeped out. They didn't work at all. But again, that's a budget issue more than anything else. So yeah, I'm going to say pass on this one and maybe go for something a little better. So that's going to do it for Bryan Loves You. Check back next time. Check out some of my other videos. See what you think. Agree or disagree with my opinion. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, if you like this, give it a thumbs up. Tell your friends. Like, share, subscribe. That whole deal. And I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.